Yes, sir.
Now, as you know, Nivedita, I told you last time that I retired from the army, but having retired, I found myself very interested in all that's going on, not only all over the world, but particularly in our country. I was already member of a large number of think tanks,
Right.
the United Services Institute, that's the military think tank, and the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, that's IDSA, which is a copy of the British uh, International Institute of Strategic Studies, known as IISS. I was also a member of the Center for Policy Research, which is run by private business, and another small set of groups which were the second track diplomacy people. They were retired senior military officers and bureaucrats, ambassadors, newspapermen who used to get together along with those of Pakistan and China, if you like, to see as to whether, other than governmental dealings, they could privately come to some understanding amongst each other uh, to create peace between bordering nations like China and India, for example, or Bangladesh and India, or Pakistan and India, Burma and India, Africa and India, Middle East, and so on. The interesting thing that we found here was that every nation has its personal interests rather than a world interest. Everybody wants to get more resources so that they enrich themselves, get better trade deals, etc. And the world tends to form into cliques, into groups, like it's done ever since World War I, in fact, and even earlier, which creates conflict. Now, it's not the military which is eager for warfare. I've told this to you before. It is the political system which is eager to use their military when they think that they have enough strength to try and achieve their aims of grabbing something beneficial to themselves and to their country vis-a-vis others. Now, you know that right from Woodrow Wilson, the President of America after World War I, who tried to start the League of Nations, there are some people who do think that you need a world body, which was eventually established by the United Nations after World War II. Idea being here to allow respective nations to come and discuss things rather than go to conflict. And but even in the United Nations, there were some cliques. If I might give my views on this, the point is that some nations are very, very powerful, militarily and economically. Now, these nations, like the United States of America today, China, and a little earlier, erstwhile Soviet Union, now Russia, the European Union got together and they also had a lot of clout. These nations still want to act outside the United Nations. Because United Nations, where there's a discussion amongst so many people, of course, there's a veto power given to the 5 nuclear powers of World War II, namely United States and Britain and France, and Russia and China. They have the veto power. That means if they don't like something, they can say, no, we don't agree, and the discussion comes to a halt, unless it goes to the General Assembly, where there are a lot of politics involved to enforce more and more smaller nations than others. Everyone has equal vote, that they must accept what the more powerful nations want in their voting pattern, so that they also get the goodies from their powerful friends, economically and by trade and other means, weapons of war and so on. So the greed of the human being prevents the United Nations from really functioning as a fair body. Now, therefore, I got myself very interested in all aspects of international relations, that is not only the diplomacy side, but the political side. What motivates people to do what they are doing and lead their nations to war? There are a large number of people who believe that all governments function politically in a slightly incorrect manner. But in the business of running a nation, I don't think we have a good system of governance really established anywhere in the world. There's a democracy on one side. Many democracies are considered more dictatorships than democracy because the ruling party seems to rule the roost. And there's the communism on the other side, which also is a sort of dictatorship. So they say they're a democrat, they're a democracy. But their development seems to be faster because they run their countries with a more deliberate rule system, as opposed to the democracies who've got a lot of voices and a lot of opposition. Anyway, this was a very interesting period for me. In addition, I have a place in Kangra, which you visited, which my father was kind enough to acquire. A lovely land, very peaceful, sleepy village called Dard. And my father had opened a clinic here, a medical clinic, where he was giving free medical aid and free medicines from his pension. And when he was getting old, he asked my brother and myself whether when we retire, we could continue with it. So I said, well, certainly. It took me a little time to retire since I reached the top. But as far as my brother was concerned, he was not so interested. He liked the idea, but he didn't participate. Nevertheless, I retired and I took over this place and started running this free clinic and getting doctors at a marginal salary from my pension to do the work here. These are village people. There are about 10, 20 very dependent on our clinic in those days, in the 1990s when I retired, 1990. But today, of course, the government has established many more medical clinics and tuberculosis clinics and so on, with the result that our medical clinic is only reduced now to giving first aid and giving free medicines. I had a doctor, very good. He's worked with me for a good almost 30 years, but about a couple of years ago, he got old. He's a cancer survivor. And therefore, when he reached the age of 85, he wanted to quit. So he quit. We are still friends. But now I only have a sort of trained technicians who are running the show in my absence. And when I come here, I also spend time there because I enjoy meeting the local people, mostly coughs and colds and, allergic reactions and breathing problems and things like that you get. And as I explained to you earlier, there are many young ladies or older ladies for that matter who have husband problems and children problems or mother-in-law problems. So we do take time to give them a little advice, common sense. So people like coming here, especially for our cough mixture, which is, I think, the best in the world. It's very simple, it's very cheap, and we give it free. Anyway, people even come from Chandigarh to get a cough mixture. They keep asking us what's in it. Well, we don't really know what's in it because it's made by somebody in Amritsar who gives it to us very cheap, by 10 gallons at a time we buy and give it to people free. And the other minor medicines just for the simple ailments. That's what's running here. Now, when I was about to retire, there's the Cheshire Homes. You may have heard of this. Cheshire Homes, my great friend, General Virendra Singh, Major General Virendra Singh, who retired from his service. He had commanded my regiment, 16 Light Cavalry. By the time he became a brigadier, he was retiring, the government gave him a Major General's rank and made him the head of the National Cadet Corps and asked him to raise the NCC, which he did very efficiently. And he was the boss of the NCC for many years. He had met a person called Lord Cheshire. I'm not sure if I told you about this gentleman earlier. Lord Cheshire was a highly decorated bomber pilot in Britain, the Royal Air Force. And he had taken over what is known as the Dam Buster Squadron. The dam buster squadron comprised Wellington bombers with a crew of about 20 people, machine guns on the top, in front, in the back, at the bottom. And these people had worked out a system of how to bust dams in Germany during the latter stages of the World War II, before the main attack across the channel in 1945, 1944-45, by the Allies against Germany, who had occupied France. You know, the Germans have a very industrial area called the Ruhr. The Ruhr Valley is northeastwards of France borders. It's the Vosges forests, a large number of rivers over there. The Rhine is to the south of that. And these small rivers in the high hills are dammed, and the water backs up, and they have a large amount of electricity production. And at the bottom, in the valleys below the dam, they're the industrial areas producing all sorts of equipment for the war, the World War II. And the Allies decided that they should bust these dams so that the production of German material for the war by civilians and factories could be adversely affected. And this is Lord Cheshire. He commanded the Wellington bomber squadron, and he worked out a system of flying very low over the backup waters of the dam from a distance of about maybe 20 kilometers. We fly towards the dam at a certain height, which he had two searchlights in front and back of his aircraft, and where the two searchlight hot points joined together was the correct height above the water. And then they had to have a certain speed, release the bomb, which would then bounce and skip over the water and hit the dam from the end where the water was pressing on the dam. And this is like throwing a flat stone on a piece of water, or you flick it across the water, and it goes bouncing, bouncing, bouncing. You may have done that when you were a kid. All of us have tried that. Anyway, he managed to bust a lot of dams, so this was known as the Dam Buster Squad. He got a DSO, MC, and bar and all that from the RAF. He was promoted to the rank of group captain, and he was very successful in busting these dams, and the large amount of water used to go down into the Rhone Valley, drowning the factories and large number of villages and people, creating a lot of death and destruction of civilians. Somehow, in the World War II, the way the Allies thought of defeating Germany was to attack the people, the civilians. Of course, today they are blaming Russia for attacking Ukraine and destroying cities and destroying civilian assets. But it makes me laugh, because that's exactly what they did themselves in World War II to Germany, and later to Japan when they dropped the nuclear weapons there, which you've gone and seen. They destroyed tens of thousands of lives of civilians. The idea here is to prevent the enemy country from production of aeroplanes, tanks, warships, ammunition, so that the method of running a war would be reduced, and hence they would be brought to their knees. Now, Lord Cheshire, after he retired from the Royal Air Force, after the war was over in 1946, he felt remorse about the thousands of people he must have killed with his squadron. And after the war was over, he went off to Eastern Germany, where the Jews had been very badly treated by the Germans, you know, the Holocaust, as you call it. And there he started serving the Jewish population who had been very badly physically and mentally destroyed in many ways in these Jewish camps. They were almost skeletons. Their mind had been shattered. They tried to join the doctors. He had money to give them some succor. There he met a lady called Sue Ryder. She was a Polish lady, and they got married because both of them doing the same work. So the combination of these two, Sue Ryder and Lord Leonid Cheshire, started after the war a thing called the Cheshire Homes. Now, the Cheshire Homes are, we've got about 23 Cheshire Homes in India. And the idea here was to create Cheshire Homes in various countries of erstwhile enemies. For instance, they want Cheshire Homes in Germany and they want it in France. They want it in Britain and North Africa, and they want it in Turkey, India and Pakistan, for instance. Like that. Idea here was that all those who had relatives in the military who got killed or badly injured could contribute funds to these Cheshire Homes. And they would look after the injured, the paraplegics, people who had been so badly injured in the war that even their families couldn't look after them. These Cheshire Homes would bring these people together, put them in their homes, look after them, medical care, mental care, wheelchairs, the lot, and give them a company amongst themselves, encourage them to play sports and play music and all that, even though they were paraplegics, they could not move around on their legs. And so, since General Vrinder Singh was in charge of it in India, he was a friend of Leonid Cheshire, whom we had met during the Korean campaign, 1953 or thereabout in Japan, and they had a similar mind of doing some service to those who have been injured very badly in the wars. And they got together, and Lord Cheshire came to India, and he wanted to start these homes in India. Now they found that I was the chief, and since I belonged to General Viru's regiment, the 16th Light Cavalry, he came to my office with Lord Cheshire when I was the chief and requested me to help. What they wanted is that according to our rules in the military personnel are not permitted to contribute to any fund which is run by civilians, because some of these funds are not above board, they are corrupt, and many soldiers who give their savings and things to these funds for enhancing their financial wealth are led up the gumtree and led up the garden path, one would say, and put devoid of their savings. So government has issued orders that no service personnel is permitted to contribute to funds of any sort, which civilian organizations try and encourage them to do. But Lord Cheshire and General Viru came to me, he was retired, to say, can you ask the military to be permitted to give funds to the World Memorial Fund, as it was called. It's a memorial for the world wars and for wars elsewhere in India, Pakistan, anywhere else. So World Memorial Fund was the WMF. And so I spoke to Rajiv Gandhi, the Prime Minister. He agreed, and he spoke to the head of the Income Tax Department. So they worked it out. And we had a meeting in the Gyan Bhavan in Delhi, where all the three chiefs are present. Admiral Nadkarni was the chairman of the Chiefs of Staff Committee. So I requested him to conduct the meeting, which he did very well in the presence of the Prime Minister and also in the presence of the income tax top official. And we spoke to the audience to say what this fund was about. And the government agreed to permit military service personnel to contribute to this fund. And they would get a return for that because they got the interest from all contributions that they made. Plus, this would help their relatives who were injured in battle by giving them special consideration in case they got injured badly. And in any military wars campaigns, Cheshire Homes would do that. So they came to my office and we got that through. And as a result, Lord Cheshire requested me that as soon as they retire, I must join the working committee and the management of the Delhi Cheshire Home, which I agreed to do. So I became a member of the Delhi Cheshire Home and on the working committee and on the board, as one might say. I am still there. And General Viru made sure that many of the retired military chiefs, both the Army, Navy, and Air Force, after their retirement were encouraged to join this so that they had a military presence in the board. And the military funds also from the Adjutant General's branch of the Army, for example, were ready to contribute some money to run these Cheshire homes. They've done human service, they've done very good service, and I've enjoyed being with them because if you go to Delhi Cheshire Home, you can see about 85 patients in wheelchairs, all well fed and being looked after. Some of them can't speak, some of them their minds are slightly astray, but nevertheless, they're all enjoying their stay and being looked after since their families can look after them. So that's a little contribution that we all wanted to do. And I've given them some funds also personally. I recollect that the chairman of the Cheshire Homes Board was a person called H.M. Patel when I first retired. And H.M. Patel had been the finance minister of government of India under the Morarji Desai government. That was after Indira Gandhi was shunted out of office for a couple of years. And Morarji Desai took over. It's around about after the emergency, 1975 or 76, Morarji, 75, he took over. 1975 as the Prime Minister. He was about 82 years old and a very well-kept human being. And he was Prime Minister for a couple of years. Then he lost majority and Indira Gandhi was elected back as the Prime Minister. But while he was there, H.M. Patel was his finance minister. His earlier stint in the government, when he was a sort of a financial bureaucrat, and he was the personal secretary to Sardar Patel. You know, when the partition took place, Sardar Patel was the strong man in the Home Ministry. Nehru was the Prime Minister, and H.M. Patel was the secretary to the Home Minister, Sardar Patel. So he knows all about Sardar Patel, and he did that. They were very keen that after I retired, that whatever money we collected, we should also contribute to the well-being of people who are suffering from disasters caused by avalanches and tsunamis, earthquakes, and so on. Shortly after I retired, there was a large earthquake in UP Hills. Large number of people, including Nepal, became destitute and they lost their homes and many of their loved ones. And Cheshire Homes decided to send them about 75 lakhs funds. And they organized an official from the Cheshire Homes to go there and hand this money to the concerned deputy commissioners to see that money was given to those who had that need. But I just retired and I knew what the government was doing. I said, you've given 75 lakhs. Government had given 6 crores. So this was not even a drop in the ocean. Secondly, you give it to a bureaucrat and his staff. And there's so much corruption in this country that by the time the bureaucrats and the various staff under the bureaucrats, down to tahsildars, then gompuras, and heads of panchayats, they all take a good slice of this and put it in their own pocket. So the amount that is really given to the man in need is very small, not good enough. I told them that. I said, this is full of corruption. So there was an argument on the board of this. Lord Cheshire was also present. And so the question was raised that if you don't want to give money to where disaster takes place, like for instance, there was a big tsunami in Bangladesh. And we sent money from the Cheshire Homes, a large number of lakhs, with an officer to go to Bangladesh to hand this money over to them to build in each village a large, very high, on stilts, large rooms, you see. So that when the tsunami warning is given, the people from the village could scramble up to this place and be above the tidal wave or above the. So Bangladesh is spending hundreds of crores on this. And our little contribution, about 50, 60 lakhs, was there to build one of these high areas in some village there. And yes, they accepted the money and they built it. How much went into their own pockets, how much they spent on the building, we don't know. But we didn't even get a word of thanks from them. So I again raised this point. I said, look, this is the sort of disaster that you are spending money on, which is a drop in the ocean compared to governments themselves. Plus, there's so much corruption down the line that it doesn't reach the people. So I was asked, what do you suggest? So I suggested that we look after tuberculosis. Tuberculosis was, as you know, I call it a disaster. And Indians, by the way, Nivedita, are the highest percentage of tuberculosis patients in the world. It's not only because of a large population, it's maybe because we are vulnerable to this disease. Now, the tuberculosis germ, if I may dwell on this for a little while, is a very interesting character because I like to see what my enemy looks like. And I happened to go to some laboratory to see what the tuberculosis germ looks like. When you look at the sputum of a human being, sputum when it brings up from his chest, and you put it under a slide and watch it under the microscope, there are black, reddish lines all over the sputum, depending on the amount of tuberculosis he's got. And you can say whether he's very badly infected or very poorly or less infected. And the medicines in those days, I'm talking of 1990, were very harsh antibiotics of a particular type, where you had to give a 6 months treatment to a person to get rid of this. Now, that was passed on all over the world by the World Health Organization. But what we found in our villages, for instance, that the quack doctors would get these medicines from the various outlets of the pharmaceutical industry, or also from the compounders and all that of government outlets, and then call themselves a doctor, though they had been compounders maybe or something, just set up a little shop in the village, say doctor so-and-so, and when a tuberculosis patient comes and if he had been diagnosed for tuberculosis by a tuberculosis center, and he had to come under treatment, they'll say, oh, don't worry, you come to us, we'll treat you. We give you these medicines for a few months, couple of months, and when they get better, then the medicines being very expensive and the patient having to buy the medicines itself, the idea was that after a couple of months when he felt better, he can stop it. Now that made, since you need to kill the germ, it takes not less than 6 to 8 months, depending on the patient. And if he's got bone tuberculosis, it takes 12 months of these medication, and you feel very ill and sick while you are having. So then the patients stop this and think they're better. Then they get the tuberculosis so nastily, it becomes multi-drug resistant. So even today, that problem is carrying on in the world, India being the maximum. But there are new medications now which are available. And so I decided in Cheshire Homes that why don't we do something about tuberculosis? So with the result, we did spend funds on that. We've got three tuberculosis teams from the Cheshire Homes, Delhi. And there's another Cheshire Homes in Bangalore and one in Dehradun, the Surider Home. We do all that, plus looking after patients with other diseases and those who are paraplegics from injuries of military conflict. When I started my father's old clinic, free clinic that he'd got here, I took it over, I converted it to a tuberculosis clinic. Hired a laboratory man and microscopes and things like that so that we could check the sputum. And we have treated, I had a doctor who was trained in government hospitals to look after tuberculosis, and he did that. Now, today, that clinic of mine doesn't have to do this because there's so many more government outlets that government is looking after this problem as best they can. Funds are available from the World Bank, and we have to follow the regimen. I did select certain villages. Mark you, the great doctors of India didn't agree with what I was doing. But I said, I'll take one village, for instance, just eastward of my village, about 7 kilometers away, is a village which had the maximum number of tuberculosis patients, not only in the village, but in the hills surrounding, where the high hills, the foothills of the Himalayas, going up to a height of about 4,000 to 10,000 feet, or 12,000 feet, under the snowline. And many of them had tuberculosis. And they were not being looked after very well because they didn't want to walk all the distance to a distant government clinic and then stand in a queue for a long time. I used to encourage them to come to our clinic or take a team to visit them in their homes in the village to give them these medicines and told them this disease has to be killed. And it also requires a lot of attention to the hygiene and sanitation of the house in which people are living. This hygiene and sanitation is very important because if you see these hills of ours, water comes from some spring or something at a higher height, and it goes to one level, second level, third level, is dropping down. At each level, there are huts of the village, starting at a height of about 12,000 feet and coming down to about 4,000 feet. And you find that where the water comes down, human beings are drinking that water, the cattle are drinking that water. There's a lot of defecation going on near that water by the cattle and the human beings. With the results, it's impure, a lot of germs get passed around. So hygiene and sanitation, and also the question of having fly proofing of the huts that these guys live in, was something that we tried to achieve. And I think retired servicemen in our villages always have wire netting and all that on their houses, because that's what they learned in the army. And every civilian thinks they are fools for having doing that. And many civilians thought that we don't know why the army is afraid of a mosquito or of a fly. And I should try and explain to them that the mosquito and a fly are worse than the Pakistani commandos or the Pakistani terrorists, because they can give you a lot of diseases to your children and to yourself, including tuberculosis. So I think we have cleaned up. We cured about 60, 70 patients around us, cleaned up these villages, and tried to teach them that if they get cough for a long period of time and a lot of sputum is coming out, they must go to a medical clinic and get themselves examined and go through the regimen faithfully. So I was very interested in this, and I was doing this, converted my father's clinic to this job free of charge. These tuberculosis medicines are very expensive, but nonetheless, use our pension funds. Once in a while, people used to come and contribute something that also was put in our fund. And we get, for anybody giving funds, we get an income tax rate of 50%. So that was that. Now, that's one aspect of how I employed myself. The other was that I was very interested in the various conflicts that are taking place and what should be done about this. Now, just before my retirement, I had suggested to the government that we need a National Security Council. That National Security Council is supposed to be at the highest level, at the Prime Minister's level, with a National Security Advisor, and maybe a board to advise the National Security Advisor as to what is to be done. Now, India didn't have this. I was the first one to project this before I retired to the Defense Ministry and on to the Home Ministry. And the Defense Secretary at that time was a chap called Naresh Chandra, who later, from being Defense Secretary, he became the Home Secretary. And after that, he retired and he was employed at the Manmohan Singh's government. He was employed as the Secretary to the Prime Minister. And then he was appointed as our ambassador in the United States, a good friend of mine. And by the time he finished with the Home Ministry and the Prime Minister's Secretariat, he did write to me that since you suggested this, we'll allow you to join this National Security Council, where he had got about 55 people as members. So I wrote back, nothing doing. 55 people will never come to any conclusion. We cannot have more than 15 or 20 people. You can select who they are. And I would suggest that you keep the politicians out of it because they have got a different attitude to everything. So I said I refuse to join this. That was one aspect of it. Later, carrying on with the story, after I had retired for about 18 years, I got a call from the then secretary to the then man who had been selected as the National Security Advisor to the Manmohan Singh government, to the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, was a person called M.K. Narayanan, who had been the head of the IB, Director IB, Intelligence Bureau, when I was the chief. And he had hired a lot of hot words because I didn't like the way they were functioning. And though he's a very nice man and a good friend, but I didn't have much time. I've explained all this to you earlier. I didn't have much time for the RNAW, the Research and Analysis Wing, and the Intelligence Bureau, because they only gave political information on the ear of the Prime Minister and did no work for the rest of us in the military. With the result, we were always surprised by both the Chinese and the Pakistanis and so on. Anyway, we had a lot of hot words, but He rang me up after I had retired 18 years. Said, General, we've got a National Security Advisory Board, you must join this. So I said, you and I never see eye to eye, and whatever you say, I say the opposite. So why do you want me to join the National Security Advisory Board? He said, no, that's the reason I wanted to join, because you have a different point of view. So I like that. Around about 2007 or thereabout, 2008, I joined the National Security Advisory Board. It normally should have lasted 1 year only, but as luck would have it, I was there for about 1 year and a half before they had a new board put there. The secretary of this National Security Advisory Board was a retired Foreign Secretary of India called Mr. Rasgotra. Now, Mr. Rasgotra I knew very well because when I was the Army Chief, he had retired as the Foreign Secretary a year or two earlier, and he and I had met very often on various think tank discussions. And we found that we had similar views of a number of things. He's from Kashmir, by the way. And then he was appointed as the High Commissioner of India to London, Britain. He came to me for briefing, and I sent him to the operations room and all that to get a briefing about India, Pakistan, Britain, Europe, all that. I knew him. Now he retired from there. And he was appointed as the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board, which comprised about 18 officials, officials and non-officials. I was there from the Army. We had a retired air chief there. We had a very high officer who retired as Director General of Defense Planning Staff. He's a naval officer called Premveer Das. He was also there from the three services. And then we had people from newspapers. We had people from, the chairman and the younger brother of the chairman of the Hindu group of newspapers in Madras. He was there. We had the top computer science engineer of India, doctor, who was a professor and then professor emeritus. There we had the top mathematician of India. We had scientists, and we had people from the intelligence, retired from the intelligence bureau. So we had some ordinary people from Assam who were running their own little think tank. So it's a very interesting group of people. We also had a lady professor from the Jawaharlal Nehru University who was in charge of the China study group of the Jawaharlal Nehru University. So we had very interesting conversations. And she was the daughter of a person who retired as the chief secretary of Madhya Pradesh. And I knew him very well because he had done the Army Staff College in Wellington when I was an instructor, and he was one of my students. And she was his daughter. So she's a professor of JNU in charge of China studies. So you'd be amazed to know that she was very friendly with the Chinese professors and so on who used to come from China to visit her. And many times when she heard my views, the military views about China, she was quite alarmed. She said, military people don't have a good view of the Chinese. Are excellent people, and you come to some of my meetings and I'll show you what their professors are. So I told her, I said, yes, I did attend some of her meetings. But I said, your professors are people of wisdom who are training students. It's a different type of human being altogether than the Chinese military.